Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 283, and we're going to talk about postmodern California. So, California obviously operating under a postmodernist mindset, right? Because they keep pushing DEI, and basically a lot of socialism, which capitalizes, that is, utilizes postmodernist discourse in order to push through a lot of their policies, which results in extremely expensive failures. And then we're going to talk about truth discovery at the end here. So I'm going to blow through the current events. I'm sure you are pretty much aware of what's going on in California, but just as a sort of quick summary, there are wildfires that are going on in California, particularly in LA, Los Angeles, which is governed by socialism, right? Regardless of if there ever was a hope or a prayer that a Republican would be the mayor or have some kind of um, political influence in California, it wouldn't matter. Most of the policies are still going to be socialistic policies. So the Los Angeles, LA firefighter budget was cut by over $17 million. And some people think that that money went towards housing migrants, giving them money, et cetera, or perhaps even to fund DEI programs. So DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, basically pushing people who are unqualified into high-paying positions primarily because of their gender or their race, right? Because they're underrepresented in that occupation. For example, firefighters generally tend to be white. Right. So a lot of firefighters are white, and people don't like the fact that firefighters are white, and they were able to negotiate contracts, which resulted in not only high salaries, but very lucrative retirement retirement plans. Okay. So people want to tap into that, right? Obviously, because all these equity people, they don't try to equalize or have diversity in jobs that no one wants. They want diversity and equity and inclusion in high-paying jobs, right? That's all they look at, right? Because what's the point in fighting for equality in jobs that no one wants, right? And so therefore you're not really going to be all that successful. But everyone wants high-paying jobs, and if you can get a high-paying job without any qualifications at all, even be a criminal, then sure, that's what you're going to support as well. So keep in mind, I said postmodern means that there's no truth, right? And because there's no truth, it doesn't matter what you do because there are no consequences because there is no truth, okay? And so they can have and push for diverse firefighting force, right? Have women, lots of weak women, have lots of trans people who have lots of limitations physically, right? And it would be okay, right? It would not affect firefighting capability in the city. And because everything is so great and there is no truth, they found surplus firefighter equipment, which they sent to Ukraine, I guess because everything is burning down there. So they need more firefighter equipment. And so this so-called surplus firefighting equipment was sent to the Ukraine. But it's funny, right? Because $500 million more was sent to the Ukraine, right? So Biden trying to unload as much of America's money, our money, to all the corrupt officials in the Ukraine, all right, and to launder a lot of that to come back to the United States. So he's desperate to do as much as he can to ruin America before he has to leave office, right? So why not send that money to LA or any of the survivors of hurricanes in Florida, South Carolina, any of these places? But no, no, no. They don't care about the average person. They want to line the pockets, that is, pay off all of the government insiders who make all of this corruption possible. So thank you, and here's your severance pay, right? It's not like Donald Trump is going to change much of it either, but hey, that's what we're going to do anyway. And clearly, you know that therefore the money that's sent over the Ukraine is not for the war. As I just saw someone write something that said that even Zelensky admits that all this money that's being sent there, none of it is going to the battlefield. So what is, where's the money going? That is what is so obvious, an obvious question that no one is asking, right? And so what is surplus, so-called surplus fire equipment? Well, maybe it's equipment that's there just in case, but didn't need to be used for maybe a couple of months. Oh, we haven't used it in a couple of months. It must be surplus, right? Sort of, and government people do this all the time. If they see something sitting around unused for even a brief amount of time, they say, "Oh, it's surplus. It's such a waste for it to just be sitting there, so let's just use it." Like bridge toll money, right? So every time you cross over a bridge, you have to pay a toll. And if you do the math, the simple math, right, they collect a lot of money. But that money is supposed to be for repair and maintenance of the bridge, right? But while it's collecting, gathering in increasing in amount so that when the bridge needs to be repaired, then you'll have the money at hand, no problem. City officials or government officials look at all that money just sitting there and saying, "Ooh, that's a waste. Let's just use it." Right. Same thing with Social Security money, right? All the money that's collected, it's just sitting there. Let's just use it until, because it's not being used right now, right? So I read also that in the middle of all these fires, and a lot of celebrities lost their homes as well, that apparently an insurance company that covers a lot of these homes, they canceled all of their policies a couple of weeks ago. And so none of them are going to be able to recoup any of their losses, if that's true. Okay, I don't know if that's true or not, but I did see that headline. So why and how does this happen? Well, because there's no accountability. No one is held responsible, right? So you have all these hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars of damage, and no one has to pay, right? None of the people who put the policies in place, which resulted in this kind of catastrophe, this monstrous failure, no one is held accountable. This means, right? So if some people got away with it, then people who come later, they're going to make costlier and costlier mistakes, more and more expensive mistakes, right? Because it doesn't matter. No matter how expensive it is, they never are going to be held accountable. So, hey, why not? So the Los Angeles mayor at the time all of these wildfires were happening, she was traveling in Ghana. That's Africa. Why Ghana? What does Ghana have to do with Los Angeles, right? And clearly we know that there's some kind of political, it's not she went there to fundraise from people from Ghana, right? That doesn't make any sense. And so clearly she's just maybe having a vacation or just basically doing some kind of political nonsense on taxpayer money, right? Her name is Karen Bass. So maybe she'll be elected governor because she's so incompetent, right? Because that's what happens in socialistic postmodernist society is if you fail bigger and you get away with it, well, now that means we can put you in a higher more responsibilities, right? More where more things can go wrong because we know you can take a hit, not be embarrassed and mortified over how much death and destruction you've brought to society. You still sleep at night, so hey, you qualify for an even higher position, right? That's pretty much how it works. And then you have the head of water management who makes $750,000 a year. What does she do with all that money? She's there so that when they fail, she can give a report how she failed and what she did wrong that meant that she failed, right? So it's not that she's fired. She doesn't lose her job. She's not fined. She's not held responsible, thrown in prison for failing to do her job. Nope, 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 right? Because she was never expected to do anything, right? She had no qualifications, I'm assuming. Any qualifications that she did have was just simply on paper, right? Because if she was qualified, then she would have seen that they are not prepared for a wildfire like this. And so then she would she would be the one saying, "Hey, hey, hey, we can't cut the budget of the firefighters. We have to do this and that to make sure that we have enough water." Nope, nope, nope. She didn't do that. And what sums it up perfectly is David Muir, right? He's a reporter for one of those legacy media stations, right? And so he's out there reporting on the wildfire in LA, right? And he looks like he's like being Johnny Dangerous, right? In the middle of the fires. I'm risking my life to bring this story to you. And he's wearing, someone said it was a fake firefighter reflective jacket, right? So it's a fake one, but it's not really real because it doesn't have all the insulation in it. But it looks like I'm one of the firefighters kind of guy, right? But what's interesting about it is that it's very tight fitting. It's sort of like a fitted firefighter fire retarding jacket, right? And then he did his half turn, and the camera shows that he put clothespins to pinch the jacket so it's tighter on his chest, to emphasize his pecs, I guess, right? And so basically, he's trying to look uh, pretty, right? That, for lack of a better expression, he's modeling himself on TV while people are dying and all their possessions are going up in smoke. He's modeling himself, right? So he's like, "Oh, this jacket is too baggy. Put some clothespins on it so it makes me look better. Oh, please." And that sums up socialism, right? If I look good, right? Even if everything that I say is a complete lie or a bunch of misinformation, doesn't matter because I look good. And you're going to pay me a lot of money because I look good. Okay. So there's that. And then solving the homelessness problem, which, of course, because all these homes just burned up, it ties in with the homeless thing. But homeless problem is a socialist problem, right? Because all of the costs and price incentives, building incentives, all of that is skewed because of regulations. And I was watching a Mises Media video with Christopher Carlton. He was talking to Ryan McMagan, and I think it came out today. But the homelessness, there are nuances. And so homelessness, no matter where you go, it's not always the same, right? And I've talked about this before about racialization. Like you talk about the homeless. Well, it's a very diverse population, right? Even though they all share the same characteristic of not having a home, but depending where they are, the characteristics of the specific homeless people, they're all different, right? To give you an example, there are housed homelessness or there's unhoused homelessness, okay? I didn't even know that was a thing. I thought if you had no place to live, you were counted as homeless. But some people are given public housing, but because it's not their housing, they're homeless, right? So go figure. I don't know. It's the wonders of government definitions, okay? But what's interesting, and Christopher Carlton goes into this, he brings out how because it's such a very diverse, these aren't his words, but I'm you know adding my own commentary to it. But because of the diversity of these categories, so yeah, they're giving a roof over some of these people's heads, but because it also offers privacy, there's a higher rate of addiction death, drug addiction death, like they overdose. But because they're alone in their apartment unit, no one knows that they have OD'd, and so no one's going to call police, and so they just die. Much, much higher among the homeless that are housed, given a place to stay. Okay. And this reinforces the notion of unintended consequences. Another way this idea of unintended consequences, I was thinking about it the other day, is that everything is connected. Like, so if you listen to the news, everything seems to happen in isolation of everything else, right? So Russia invades Ukraine, right? As if nothing had happened 12 years ago, 13 years ago, that would ultimately result in Russia invading Ukraine. Like Ron Paul was warning the world in 2012 that U.S. policy in Ukraine in 2012 was going to result in war, and here we are, right? But of course, everyone forgets what Ron Paul said in 2012. They just called him a kook, a nut job, right? And so they get to be surprised when something happens, like when Russia invades the Ukraine. I've talked about that before, so let's just move on. In other words, nothing is in isolation. Everything pulls and pushes and influence on everything else in society, right? Because there's so much subsidized housing, your grocery bill is rising. Because we're funding war everywhere, we have terrorism in the United States now, and so everything is related to everything else, and the effect that all these different events have on us, they're weighed differently. So some things uh, have a greater effect on an individual's life as opposed to other things. So it brings us to Jane Jacobs, which I talked about in episode 136. That title of that episode was Costly Affordable Housing, right? And she personifies the problem of socialism, especially when it comes to housing. So Jane Jacobs wrote in the 1960s, looking at New York City, she's saying, all these people, we have these so-called slums in New York City. We need to unslum the slums, right? We're going to improve the slums in New York City, right? And so she wrote this book, Death and Life of Great American Cities. And one of the lines that's in there early in the book, she says, we got to figure out how to keep people in the city so that they'll unslum the slums, right? And so she wants people to stay in the slums, right, to turn them into not slums. And what was really interesting is her complaint was people are moving out of the slums too quickly, right? Because they don't stay for any length of time, right? They don't bother to improve what they're living in, okay? And so she's like, how do we do this? How do we keep people in the slums, right? Uh, well, so there's this cartoon of a communist state. It's a cartoon, right? Where the really nice houses of the city are surrounded by a gigantic wall. And so they're cut off from the slums, which go right up to the walls on the outside, right? And so the people in the really nice houses are separated from all the slums and the poor people who live outside of that really nice area, right? Well, everyone who works for the government, all the politicians and everyone who is connected with government, like lobbyists and all the companies that receive the government contracts, they live in the nice houses. Everybody else, and that would be people like you and me, we are the ones living in poverty outside, right? And everyone who sees that and says, "Oh yeah, that's socialism." Well, the socialists say, "No, that's capitalist lies," right? It's the capitalists that live in that nice area, and then people, because they're so mindless and uneducated, right? They believe that, right? But we can see the results of socialism now. It's so obvious everywhere, and you can't see it any better than Toronto. Toronto invited Jane Jacobs some time ago to help them plan their city, Toronto, because apparently it was a dump, right? And they're like, please, please help us plan this city. And so if you go there, apparently Toronto is very, very nice, right? A lot of posh people, right? Bougie people live there. And I had a student, an honor student, he went to Toronto. That was their class senior trip, was to wander around in Toronto for a week. And so he said that he was skeptical of how good Toronto was, and so he walked around the city for several days looking for a slum. And I said, "How'd you do?" And he says, "I couldn't find a slum." So you're wrong, you're wrong, teacher. Right? You're wrong. Like her ideas work. And I said, "Oh, okay, really?" And you can see, like in LA, it's heavily planned, and so you want to build affordable housing. It's $750,000 per unfurnished unit, right? Meant and earmarked for homeless people, $750,000, right? And this was in the New York Times in 2020. And to put up a tent, I'm talking a tent for homeless people is $44,000, right? $44,000 tent. Come on, right? Um, just buy them a car, But so you can see that the costs of failure is socialized. Who's paying for those $44,000 tents? Who's paying for that $750,000 per unfurnished unit for the homeless, right? Apartment for the homeless, everyone else. And so the costs are really high, but all of the people who planned it and were responsible for it, they don't pay for it. All of us who don't even live in LA, we have to pay for it, right? Um, so the costs of the failures are socialized, whereas the funding of the initial project is given to politicians and all the contractors that they employ. Okay. So what should oh, by the way, so if you go to Toronto, where are all the slums? Yeah, it's just like that cartoon. The slums are on the outside. And it was really funny because when I was talking to the non-honors students, right? A lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I was at Toronto." And I said, "Oh, really? So where do your where does your family live?" And they said, oh, they live in the suburbs of Toronto. And I said, oh, they're really rich. And she's like, no, they're really poor. And so to have fun, they go into the city, right, where it's nice, clean, safe, and very bougie. You see what I'm saying? And so that's why that honor student couldn't find any slums in the city limits because they're pretty much illegal, right? All the poor people have been pushed out of the city to the suburbs, right? And so you don't actually eradicate or solve any problems. You just relocate all of the problems to a different area, right? So everyone in Toronto gets to say, "Oh, we solved homelessness." No, you just pushed it out of the city, okay? And that's how socialism works, and that's how eventually in a socialistic, communistic society, all the poor people will be living outside of the city. Okay. So what should happen, right? It shouldn't be us who has to pay for all of this stuff. It's the people who make these decisions, like the mayor or the water management person. They are the ones who should be held responsible. They should be thrown into prison. They should be forced to pay out of their own pocket. Remember, I think it's because of sovereign immunity that protects them from this kind of result, right? They can do all this evil, force, and destruction and even death, but they don't have to be held responsible. It's like sovereign immunity. I think some variety of sovereign immunity. Right. And even if people were able to sue them, right, where does the payout come from? It comes out of our tax dollars, right? And so they cause us harm. We have to pay for all these damages. And then when we sue them and try to get them to pay the damages, we have to pay for those damages too, right? And so none of it makes any sense at all, which is why the failures continually get bigger and bigger. Now, I said it's postmodern. Socialism is using postmodernism, right? There's no truth, and that's why we can do DEI, and there won't be any negative consequences. But obviously, there are. You're putting people who are unqualified, who are unable to do the job, you're giving them the job, right? And so, but how can you decide if there is such a thing as no truth? There's no truth, right? If we're going to go with that, then how do you find any idea with the truth, right? Uh, so even in a world where you're going to entertain the idea, right? Let's go take their perspective. Like there is no truth. But some ideas cost more than others, right? So you can totally avoid religious morality accusations like, oh, you just want to shove your religion in my face. No, you can avoid all of that when you say, well, look, just let people choose what they think is most cost effective for them. And if you decide to do something that's really bad and it blows up in your face, well, that's your problem. Now you have to pay for damages. Okay. In that process, we do what I call morality discovery. You discover what is probably the best choice and what are the choices which really are not good at all. You can call that truth. You can call that the better idea or the way to do it or not. It doesn't matter. Because if you're the one that has to pay for those choices, then you don't get to pretend that you are somehow morally superior to other people, right? Or you have to continue to pretend that you don't have morality, you're just doing what's right, which is goofy, right? Morality means what's right, right? So if you want to avoid that whole socialistic thing, like saying, "Oh no, that's just racist," what you say is the right way of doing it. That's just racist, and so we're not going to do it. Well, then they should be forced to pay the cost of all the choices and policies that they impose on us. And in that process, then you begin to truth then reemerges, or at least the best solutions reemerge, and life gets better, right? The quality of living gets better, the standard of living gets better, right? And government becomes smaller and smaller. Okay. And even when you do find a good solution, it is only temporary because someone else is going to come along with an even better idea. Okay. That's it for today. Hopefully you don't live in LA. And yeah, and hopefully where you're living, you don't have to worry about this kind of socialistic malfeasance. Talk to you next time.